two presenters, Dr. Beth Samuelson and a Ph.D. candidate, James Kigamwa from Kenya. And first, James is a Ph.D. candidate in the literacy, culture, and in our LCLE department. He's a fourth year. He worked with an NGO in a region of Africa before, and he worked in adult basic literacy, developing literacy primers and training materials for community workers on how to teach reading and writing in indigenous languages. And his current research interests involve the language shift among African immigrant families in the United States. And Dr. Beth Samuelson is a faculty member at the LCLE department as well. And she's been here for several years. And she's the faculty advisor for the Books and Beyond project, which involves a school in Rwanda as well as one in New Jersey, a secondary school. So we're very happy to have them both together in their first presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think we'll go ahead and start. So basically, the Books and Beyond project is about authoring, illustrating, publishing, and marketing a collection of short stories by students here in the U.S., K to 12 students specifically from a school based in New Jersey, and you'll get to hear more about that. It's about engaging these globally minded students, helping them to employ critical literacy skills as they design and develop stories. It's a cross-cultural literacy and storytelling exchange. As you're going to find out, it's not just them writing. We also have the children from a school in Rwanda who write stories which will be shared on this side. It's also about availing books for Rwandan children, books that are written in English. As you hear about a policy change in Rwanda which has made English take a very central role in the education curriculum, the shift from French to English. And it's also about funding development projects in Rwanda. Down there you can see two covers of the book, a cover of the book that's been written. A very long list of authors is right there. Those are Rwandese writers, and then authors from the K-12 school in New Jersey, and a list of their mentors from Indiana University who are from the Global Village. Just for those who might not be familiar with where Rwanda is, that should give you an idea of where it's located. Right next to Burundi to the south, the Congo to the left, to the north there's Uganda, and that blue patch there is the biggest freshwater lake in Africa, Lake Victoria, and across there is Kenya. To the south there's Tanzania. Okay. And as we said, it's about delivering books. Last year we took more than 2,000 copies of the book that had been developed to kids in this school in Rwanda. As you can see, that boy is holding on to the book. And I think this year more books were taken from the second title which was developed.
The IU students are involved as writing mentors. So they're paired with kids from routine schools in New Jersey. And we wanted the kids in the States, and also the kids in Rwanda, to talk about their own lives and to share their lives with each other. So this presentation is mainly about how we've gone about teaching the students here in the States to write for a Rwandan audience. We don't have a parallel process set up in Rwanda yet. There's a different kind of a process going on there with secondary students mentoring the sixth graders who are writing, but we're not going to get into that today. The first year, they chose a theme. It was home and places of safety, and so we had a lot of stories about going home or getting lost and finding one's way home and that sort of thing. The second year, which was this summer, they talked about taking care of our earth, and so there was a focus on environmentalism, recycling, planting gardens, and different things like that. One of our major questions was, how do we help student writers and their mentors to realize that the cultural differences between Rwanda and the United States will have significant impact on their writing at all levels. The question of how to teach writers about audience is a perennial one, and so we had to consider that. When we went to get some theoretical inspiration for what we were doing, we looked in composition rhetoric and writing there about audience considerations. And so in the teaching of composition, questions about how do you set up assignments to help students to recognize the importance of their audience, how do you help them to adjust their writing so that they're aware of their audience. These are perennial considerations. We looked at contrastive rhetoric, which is an affiliated field, but it tends to look more at international writers coming into the academic context in the United States, or professional writers writing for a global audience, sort of in a global business concept. How do we write for people around the world? But it's all going into English. And how do we write, especially international writers? How do they write? How can we teach them to write an academic paper or write for an academic audience? But nothing about how do we teach young children to write fiction or simple nonfiction for each other, especially writing for English language learners to understand. We couldn't find anything that had specifically to do with that. James is going to talk a little bit about what we found in new literacy studies.
Yes, and we found the new literacy's perspectives to very clearly appropriate in situating this kind of work. The notion of literacy as a social practice, the very fact that these texts were going to go across cultures, it was clear that an autonomous model of literacy, just assuming that because the kids in Africa know how to read and write, they would understand the stories, was not enough. They had to engage, understand clearly that it would be an ideological form of literacy. And the more the children, the writers from the US side knew about their audience on the other side, the better or the easier the text would be to comprehend for the children on the other side of the globe. Okay?
So one of the first things that came out of thinking about audience with the students, the first year we didn't have any structure set up for explicitly training them, and what happened was that I read each text several times, and James read them a couple of times, and there were other people who read them. And we noticed that the students, without any explicit training, they still tried to model their audience according to what they imagined the Rwandan audience would be like. And so they wrote a lot of things about what they believed the students' lives would be like. They weren't necessarily correct. And part of why this became an issue is because we structured this project around an ideology that says, this is your writing, we're going to give you suggestions, but we're not going to take a strong hand in editing your writing. And so we would read and we'd make suggestions, and then they would go back to the IU writing mentors, who would then work with their team writers, and then, things didn't always necessarily get changed. So we had some interesting results. I'm going to show you a few things. These are some of the themes that came up in some of the early drafts, which were then discarded. Well, if they pictured Rwandan life, what is it? Well, they talked about warriors, and all the kids had a 2-mile walk to school, and they had tiny classrooms, they lived in small villages. Sometimes the word hut came up, which is objectionable in some contexts, or there was war and that sort of thing. In this draft, we have the sacred land of Rwanda and a prince named Habimana. I don't know if this is an actual story or not. They just probably dreamed it up. So we needed to address these things. We said, you have to think about writing about what you know and do it in a way that communicates about your life to the kids in Rwanda. Don't try to write about what you think their life is like, but write about your own life. And so this is what we got. Angelica's choice. Angelica is thinking about whether she should go